Hey everybody, welcome back to Historical Light. I'm your host, Brother Alex Powers, past master at Gardner Lodge, and no episode would be complete without our co-host, Brother Robert Marshall. What's up, man? How you been?
I have been well. How about you?
Not too bad, not too bad. COVID is still a thing. Is it big in Texas right now? I know it was kind of rising last time we talked.
Yep. I think Texas is one of the worst, uh, or at least one of the states with the worst COVID. I don't know what you call it, but I think we just became the first state to hit 1 million cases.
Wow. Yeah, so definitely picking up. So we're at a point here in Kansas that we are able to open lodge again. We're bound to the first degree. Still no degree work, although it's in talk right now of figuring something out in that manner. Um, well, actually, I may have misspoke. I think they actually did just release something where we could do degree work, but it's kind of on the fence of where that's going. But my lodge personally is still at a point that it's been very hit and miss. That we have enough guys to actually open a stated meeting to hold business, to have that quorum, so to speak. How's Waco Lodge been going with that?
Uh, we're seeing a slow increase in attendance. Last night was decent. It wasn't back to the same average attendance numbers as we are having before the pandemic, but it was better than the last couple of months. I don't know when you guys started meeting again. I think we started up in August. Uh, and we weren't able to do degrees at that point. It was just stated meetings. Maybe it was July. But then they opened it back up to degrees in September, October. I was actually on a trip out of state, and my lodge hurried through a couple of fellowcraft degrees while I was gone, much to my surprise. Uh, but attendance is slowly on the rise. It looked pretty good here last night.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it all came at a really awkward point. Our lodge is kind of rural to the metro area here. So we got a little less than some places. And we haven't been like heavy on degrees in the last couple of years. We do a couple a year and kind of want to do more. And then all of a sudden we get this boom and we've got like a handful of people like at the door ready to go, and COVID hits. And now we've got all these people waiting. It's just been kind of a downer on a lot of us. Is like, we try to stay in contact with them and really just hope they're still interested when everything gets to the point that we can really put them through. My biggest worry is, even though that we're back to the point of potentially being able to hold degrees, while we're also at the point of like teeter tottering, being able to even open a traditional meeting, what that experience is really going to be like, open a meeting and then actually look at even holding a degree. So I'm really hoping we can see kind of a surge come back there. Obviously got to play it safe and not downgrading that aspect at all. But yeah, I'm hoping we can come back strong and still offer some, quality experiences coming through.
Yeah, our arc was similar. We had a unusually low number of degrees over the past few years. A kind of a slow decline in numbers over the past 5 or 6 years, and then it blew up in at the end of 2019 to the point that we had I think 11 new members of the lodge in January. A combination of petitioners to receive the degrees for the first time and existing Masons transferring in. So a total of 11 new members of the lodge in January. And then, of course, the shutdown followed shortly after that. I think right after our March stated meeting for us is when the shutdown hit. I actually just personally way far on the side of I'd prefer to see Masonry still shut down, no meetings allowed. Uh, I just don't see the justification for it. If lodges can't survive not meeting for a year, maybe that's indicative of whether they should survive. Not knocking your lodge, I'm just talking generally, looking at it from a macro level. It sucks. It's been hard on our lodge. Of those 11 new members, I think we probably lost a couple due to lack of interest or them making different life decisions during the shutdown, like one guy who joined the Army. Uh, so I say that from a perspective of it has definitely hurt the momentum of our lodge, but I don't know. I'd rather risk hurting the momentum of lodges than kill brothers. As
Yeah.
drastic as that sounds, I guess I'm one of the Kool-Aid drinkers who have accepted that COVID will actually kill guys if it goes on. Uh,
Well, so I mean, you say that, but at the same point, as we just covered, like you have a different perspective of it than other areas. Like you're in an area that's getting hit harder than most. So, I mean, at the same time, you've definitely got to take those precautions, especially in your area, because it's more active than in a lot of other places. So it's that much more of a reality. So, I mean, yeah, it's the danger is real, and I totally get that. With that in mind, where has your grand jurisdiction said anything about like virtual meetings? I know there's some jurisdictions around Kansas where they encourage to meet, like just to get together, but we can't hold an actual meeting virtually. But I know some other jurisdictions have done altered ritual to allow that for this time period. How's Texas mind frame in that area?
we've had an interesting approach to it, I guess. I, I think some of the appendant bodies have gone different directions, but I can tell you, Grand Lodge here, we had the shutdown, no meetings, no anything in March, and then there was kind of a debate for a few months over what we should be able to do, what we should not be able to do. Grandmaster Underwood was in favor of restarting degrees at the same time that we reopened for stated meetings back around August or July. But some of our other Grand Lodge officers did not yet feel comfortable doing that. And so there was effort made to, you mentioned like a modified ritual, not for online stuff, but they were trying to develop a modified way to do degrees in person while maintaining social distancing and mask wearing, which for any Mason out there, just kind of mentally working through the logistics of a guy being blindfolded and stuff like that while maintaining social distancing. Uh, some real hurdles to figure out there. They ultimately didn't figure out anything, and they just waited until they felt comfortable opening up for degrees again. We were not allowed to have any meetings virtually. We were allowed to handle basic business needs virtually. Uh, the kind of stuff that we would do anyway outside of meetings if necessary, pay bills, all that kind of normal stuff. Um, One interesting decision that our grandmaster made that I thought, just seemed kind of odd to me, but I think it was in response to some stuff that was in the news, was that instructors, like I could teach our EAs and fellowcrafts over the phone, but I was disallowed from teaching them over video. Uh, because it was decided that video conferencing was not secure enough to teach the memory work, but the telephone was secure enough, and I don't. I mean, I didn't get it. It didn't
Yeah.
make sense to me. But I guess that's why I'm not asked to make decisions.
That's really interesting, man. Um, being in Texas, where you have such a high per capita of dealing with this COVID situation versus like here in Kansas, where the numbers are rising, but it's not something we see in our everyday lives, so to speak. Um, how much have you ran into it? Of like, do you know anyone that's actually caught it down there? What have you dealt with around that?
Uh, yeah, I know some people who caught it. I know our new two brothers who are dead. Uh,
Wow.
uh, I know tons of people who think they caught it, but I mean, I don't know what to make of that. But yeah, I know quite a few folks who have tested positive with or without symptoms.
Is that right?
Mhm.
So I came down with something. I tested negative, but I was on my butt for over a week. Um, Robert Johnson came down, and his family chilled with us for a couple days, perfectly fine, no issues, no symptoms. They left early Sunday morning, perfectly fine. Oh, they left probably, I don't know, 7:30, 8, something around there. By noon, just out of nowhere, I was in bed, and I was in bed the remainder of the week, just dying, horrible, body aches, everything. Got tested, said negative, but I don't know, man. I looked it up and it said they've got like a 38% false negative. So I didn't chance it. I had a official visit I was supposed to do and a lodge meeting. I avoided both of those because at the time I still had a little something going off on my chest, and kind of energy levels were still off. Felt a ton better, but just not quite there. Like we talked about a little bit ago, just that abundance of caution, especially around these elderly brethren, definitely not worth it. So, I stayed home. Luckily, feeling all better now. Was it that? Was it something else? Who knows? And that's kind of the tough part of it, right? When this came out, originally, we were dealing with allergy season and stuff like that, and now we're kind of hitting that again. And oddly enough, when you've got all these people that would just kind of normally be getting sick, have kind of tended to be, at least around here, the peak seasons. So it's like it's kind of hard to determine, but if you're feeling stuff, just be a hermit. It's the only way we're going to get through this, right?
Yep. And the ultimate takeaway being not to hang out with RJ or
Yeah, exactly, 100%. So today it's actually just us, and we don't get a chance to do this quite enough, to have these deep dive conversations with the two of us. Um, we've been going through something in this country right now that we go through every few years, and that's dealing with a major political election. And politics being something we don't normally touch on in Freemasonry, there is an interesting correlation in Freemasonry, and that is the Anti Masonic Party, which is kind of weird to think about, right? But they were the third largest, or I'm sorry, the third official recognized Masonic or political affiliated party when it came to politics. And it was solely on the pedestal or premise of being against Freemasonry, and putting their candidates on that realm. What's your thoughts on this, Rob?
my thoughts on the anti-Masonic Party.
Yeah.
Generally, my thoughts are it was sort of an inevitable explosion that occurred due to a number of circumstances that all kind of convened at the right time and right place. Of course, it's usually considered to have come out of the Morgan affair.
Yeah.
Uh, I would say that the Morgan affair was, well, it's like one of the anti-Masonic Party leaders was accused of saying during his lifetime that the body that supposedly turned up in the river would serve as good enough of a Morgan uh, for the election, basically implying, the facts of the Morgan case didn't really matter, just that there was something that could be pointed at to uh, blow up the anti-Masonic sentiments into a cohesive movement was all that really mattered. But I think something that often gets overlooked when Masons talk about the anti-Masonic Party is that, at least from my view, I would say it was not much of a political movement. It was something that was a religious movement, and became politically convenient for certain figures to take hold of. But I see it as a religious movement, not a political movement.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as well, right? Like, I mean, the church at the time was the huge driving force behind that. And looking back at the timeline of it, it correlates right in when we had Freemason in office, right? Andrew Jackson. And while he was awfully popular with the people, he didn't have a lot of uh, good blood with the House at the time. So, push come to shove, this is a good point, or a convenient point for them to be kind of able to push their motives within this, and make an otherwise, good political figure kind of be a shamed individual in relation to being connected with Freemasonry. So I mean, yeah, we definitely see the Morgan affair being kind of the boiling point that brings this stuff into the light of day, right? Which was that was like 1826, about the time we saw that, and then it's like pretty much right after, within 1827, I think they officially organized 1828 for the Anti Masonic Party, and yeah, I mean there's definitely a connection there. It's interesting to think about. Do you think something like this could happen today, or would it just be blown off? I mean, we've seen the waves of anti-Masonic sentiment come, through the ages, and it's definitely still alive today. But do you think it's alive enough for people to take it seriously to a level like this?
I think that just depends on the same kind of circumstances, convening or not convening. Like I mentioned, I think we can see evidence of the potential for it if we look around. I'm not on Parler, but I've come to understand that there are already anti-Masonic conspiracies being talked about on Parler. There have been anti-Masonic conspiracies talked about on 4chan and various other media for years. Of course, in the UK, anti-Masonry is pretty prominent. It really was very prominent in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's calmed down a little bit, but is still pretty big there. There's rumors on social media that Masonry has something to do with the current controversial election, that Masons wanted Biden in, or Masons didn't want Trump in, or whatever the accusation is. So that stuff's out there, and
But
so
it's kind of funny at the same
yeah,
point on the Trump aspect, because remember when Trump was, fighting for the office the first time, we had that one artist do those, well, you call them artists, sculptor, whatever, did all those sculptures and placed them at odd points around the US, with Trump nude wearing a Masonic ring. So you get it on both sides of the spectrum, I suppose.
Yeah, like I said, regardless of the particular accusation or which direction it's in, the basic ingredients for anti-Masonry are obviously still there, and if the right populist comes along and takes a hold of that and shares it with people in a way that resonates, then you never know what can happen.
For sure, for sure. So yeah, like we were talking about, we see this come into kind of coalition around the time that Andrew Jackson is back in the election scene, known Freemason, proud Freemason, and really this is just shortly after the fact that he served as Grand Master. So he's really not just any Mason. He's a very notable Mason. He served as Grand Master of Tennessee from 1822 to 1824, and then just matter of years later enter into this time period. So there were several quotes and stuff he put out very positive towards Freemasonry, and I think they definitely geared this as a tactic in at least round one of the Anti-Masonic Party to really kind of go after him. But we really don't see that they got that high on the political scene to like get elected officials into those positions, right? Like I think the highest one we see is the governor of Vermont for 1831, William Palmer. He got elected in on an anti-Masonic ticket, and he actually stayed in office until 1835. But besides that, we don't see presidents actually take in other positions like that.
You had a former president, right? Quincy Adams, and God knows just anything that was anti-Andrew Jackson, Quincy Adams was going to be in favor of. Uh, so there's that. Thaddeus Stevens, he was a very influential figure, and he had jumped on the Anti-Masonic Party. There's some major issues of the day that I think conflated with some of the anti-Masonic rhetoric. That's where when you really start getting into the thick of it is figuring out how those things aligned or didn't align. But I don't think they were ever going to have uh, you know major victories, because their platform was more about not electing Masons than it was about electing non-Masons. There were even some Masons who became major candidates on the Anti-Masonic Party, right? So
Right.
I think they cared more about the conspiracy theories that really blew up with the Morgan affair, of Masons controlling courts and different government offices and police departments and things like that. Uh, uh, so it's weird. How do you measure the success of a movement that is not based on getting their own people elected as much as it is based on getting other people not elected? Uh,
Right.
that's tricky. I don't know.
It's a convenient way. I mean, it's a tactic, right? You're playing to the other's thoughts, and you put your, well, not really, you not put your opinion aside, but you put your direct motive aside and make them think what you want them to think, like shiny thing over here. Like you mentioned, John Quincy Adams. Yes, he wasn't elected on the anti-Masonic ticket. He was president before Jackson, but he was one of the key figures in the anti-Masonic Party, and then went on to, I believe he was one of the founders of the Whig Party that transferred over after that. But it makes you wonder, he was so against it. Right after him gets a Freemason in office, and he's one of the main guys on that party to go directly after that. So it makes you wonder, but they definitely had their tactics there for sure.
And with Quincy, you get simultaneous with his anti-masonry, you get anti-slavery, and so the whole emerging dichotomy in America of North versus South, slavery versus abolitionist. The anti-Masonic movement was very much caught up in that debate. Unfortunately for Freemasonry, you get a lot of uh, the Masons of that era being on the pro-slavery side of that debate. But again, that's all in looking at it in a bubble of that being the issue to discuss. You also get the Great Awakening, right? The massive Protestant revival that burned up America, and Masons were targeted heavily under that. Without the Great Awakening, I don't think you get the Anti-Masonic Party. You don't get uh, the Anti-Masonic movement at all. But because there was a Great Awakening, and Baptists and Presbyterians uh, who were obviously viewing Episcopalians, which was very pro-Masonic congregation, as rivals, Masonry kind of became the convenient identifier of their religious enemy.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to kind of pick an issue of the day and then look at the anti-Masonic Party to see uh, how that movement corresponded or rivaled whichever issue it was.
For sure. No, that's a great point, man. I mean, yeah, bring it into the Great Awakening. Like, you've really got to look at that and understand, not to say that religion is not of an importance today, but looking at like the hold it had on everyday life of our communities in those days versus now, it's a big reality within that difference. I mean, coming directly after that Morgan affair, we look at the issues that the church brought into play in regards of Freemasonry. I mean, we saw Grand Lodges shut down overnight, lodges, all over the place shut down overnight because people were scared to go into them because that church was that community. And if they're, painting this as evil and you are associated with that, then, I mean, your name is tarnished all over town. So, I mean, yeah, it's a huge point to play. And, I think a lot of people today may look back and, I mean, you've really got to value the stronghold that religion had in our society at the time period. So, I mean, it's a huge factor.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the anti-Masonic Party politically giving way to the Whig Party, so you see a lot of parallels there with some of the same
Yeah.
guys crossing over, and the Whig Party being very anti westward expansion. So that's another major issue of the day. That it's interesting to see how that works with the anti-Masonic Party, because the anti-Masons of the day were very anti-westward expansion. The other side of that coin becomes Masonry thriving in the West, because the anti-Masonry wasn't reaching in the West. And so in a lot of cases, Masonic lodges were the first things in the westward villages and towns, and became extremely important and successful there as a result. Uh, so it's interesting how the movement kind of just really touches every aspect of society, at least on major issues, and had both good and negative effects on Freemasonry. I've seen Masonic authors argue that the anti-Masonic Party was a great thing for Masonry, because it did create the short and medium term lull that you mentioned, where not only were buildings somewhat abandoned, but men were attacked in the streets for being Masons, and voted out of office and things like that. But in the longer term, there developed a very strong revival and positive movement around Masonry as a response to the lull and vitriol that the anti-Masonic Party put forth, including basically giving away the West to the pro-Masonic movement because of the what happened to be a shared uh, view of people who didn't like Masons also being people who didn't like the idea of westward expansion.
Yeah, for sure. Putting that into mind, it kind of makes me wonder because we look at how things happen or how things are what they are now because this happened here and this happened here and this happened here. And if it would have happened any other way, it would be completely different, right? And we look at masonry the way it is today, and you kind of wonder, if it didn't happen, like the authors were saying there being a great thing, you do have to sit back and really wonder, like, where would masonry be? Like, pointing out the westward expansion, the opportunity to go in there and get lodges set up and have that as a strong point for community. If they were involved in that, how would that have altered the Masonic history and legacy moving into those areas? It's interesting to think about, man. But one way or another, we got through and we we prevailed, and I don't think masonry is going anywhere as much as some people want it to. I mean, we're still seeing this today over in Europe. uh, England, to this day, is still dealing quite a bit with having to disclose Masonic membership and such, and really being a factor that affects a lot of people's professional lives in association. And, we, for the most part, not saying entirely, because I know of some people that have had issues because of it. But, for the most part, we're able to kind of live with not having to soak that reality in. We take it for granted to a large degree, because most people just don't care, or at least people that we're directly affected with. But
Yeah, so in this particular area, it is an issue with the Baptist community, and this is I live in the Baptist capital of the world,
mm,
so I can tell you that the Baptist community does have a pretty lively anti-Masonic thread in it, which of course is kind of funny because so many important Baptist leaders were active Freemasons. Uh, but same thing in Utah, right? In Utah, with the Mormon question of Masonry, which ties
yeah,
back into anti-Masonic Party things when you look at William Morgan's widow being a wife of Joseph Smith. There's some interesting interconnections there. But the LDS Church was rather uh, anti-Masonic until somewhat recently. Uh, Huge props to them for recently not only becoming less anti-Masonic, but also actually openly embracing and acknowledging the influence that Masonry had on the LDS ritual and beginnings with a PR campaign that they've started, which is a full 180 from uh, what you would have seen from them just 20, 30 years ago. But that still means that within the LDS church, we're still living in a time when people have strong memories in Utah or other strong LDS communities when being a Mason was considered a very improper or potentially sinful thing. Some Catholic churches down here, it's still an issue. I mentioned Baptist here, but we used to be part of Spain, so the Catholic faith is still pretty strong in Texas, and I've heard stories, especially as you get closer to the border, where there's more and more Catholic uh, uh, believers, that anti-Masonry can get pretty strong in those areas. So uh, I think for again, as I said at the beginning, it seems like in America there has been a greater tendency towards anti-Masonry being an inseparably religious idea, whereas in the UK, like you mentioned, there was a big effort to uh, force all people running for office to disclose their Masonic membership. So it's a very political thing there without as much religious uh, flavor to it as there is here.
right, for sure. So you mentioned where you're at, having such a Baptist influence and then being heavily, against Masonry. Is that something that you see actively? Like, I mean, do they protest lodges down there, anything like that? Is it in your face, or is it mainly like keyboard warriors like we deal with here?
Uh, I mean, so we don't get protesters at the lodge. We've had some protesters at the Grand Lodge in recent history. Uh, you get some strange characters showing up at lodges sometimes with some pretty weird ideas or protesting type of statements to make. Uh, I think here you get it more on a one-on-one during your daily life basis, where you'll run into people who, whether you're wearing something Masonic or it somehow comes up, uh, it's in that casual environment where people seem to feel more emboldened to tell you that they think you're going to hell, or
Sure.
uh, their preacher said you can't do this, or don't y'all take an oath? That's against the Bible. Uh, mm, yeah, I think that's usually the context here is day to day interactions, and
For
that
sure.
does happen. You do get negative reactions that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. Up here, I've heard stories of people having issues with that. Personally, I mean, once or twice I've caught some negative comments. Usually it's just, it's that, and it's, there's nothing else behind it and it doesn't go anywhere. Um, but I mean, besides your crazy characters, right? Like, we had a guy a few years back. They had to, send out a whole notice to all the lodges because we had this weirdo show up at Grand Lodge, came inside, and I think he ended up threatening to bomb the place or something. But ended up essentially saying that he had been made like Grand Master of the world by the Queen or something crazy like this. And then, whatever, they go out and they, get this guy's plates and stuff, just be like, all right, dude, you're crazy, we're going to call this in. He's got Kansas Masonic plates of all things, and he's in there, bashing the Kansas Grand Lodge and whatnot. So we've dealt with stuff like that. I think it was almost every lodge in the state just 2 years ago had the I'm sure every Mason has been confronted with the transition or you know, transition of the Albert Pike Morals and Dogma, where they go in and add a bunch of stuff that's not actually in there in the first place. And they shove these like 500-page thick pamphlets in the door of almost every lodge in Kansas. And that surprisingly ended up being a brother. That is no longer a brother anymore. But,
As
we deal with
lucky.
stuff like that. For the most part, though, it's like we don't have to worry about walking into lodge. The most I deal with around here is the keyboard warriors, right? Like, we've had the chip events for lodge and stuff, and I've shared those out because annually they'll get a booth at the county fair. There's a lot of people and done it for decades and decades. Um, but yeah, I posted on there, and I'll get some crazy characters on there just bashing me for that, or chipping kids and all this BS. But in everyday life, I guess if they think it, because I wear a lot of shirts, hats, whatever, if they think it, not that many people ever really say anything to me. Like I've said, I've had one or two comments, but nothing that ever has personally impacted my life in a personal physical manner, which is a blessing, I guess. But
I get comments from people pretty regularly.
is
Uh,
that right?
and I actually don't wear a whole heck of a lot of Masonic stuff, but uh, I do get comments. I'll say it's not just crazies here, right? So in the 90s, for the first time in the history of Baylor University, the oldest university in Texas, right? It's been around since the 1830s, uh, 1840s. For the first time in the history of the school, the president of the university was not a Mason. Uh, and he went on a pretty serious anti-Masonic campaign. He got what was then a Masonic Lodge on campus, off campus, and Baylor organizationally really distanced itself from Masonry. Uh, and so, I mean, that's a large and very influential entity in this area, major university in a medium-sized city. And Down further south, you get into Austin, the UT campus area. It's a more in that case. So it's interesting, right? In the Baylor bubble, as it's sometimes called, the anti-Masonry is coming from a religious conservative perspective of Masonry being something that will compete with a man's faith or something along those lines, which that is very in line with the anti-Masonic political party of the 1820s. The At least the religious part of it is in line with that conservative aspect. So in Austin, we have a very strong liberal community, and there you'll actually get pushback over the fact that we only let men in, or that we adhere to old school ideas, which, if you're coming from a more liberal leaning perspective, sounds outdated or against maybe some of your goals and things like that, anti-feminist perhaps, and so you'll get negative reactions from that end. And looking back at the anti-Masonic Party, there is an element from which I think there was what we would now consider a liberal sort of pushback, in that the whole idea of there being uh, an old money aristocratic cabal controlling the direction of the government and the courts and society in general, uh, at that time had a very liberal feel to it, whereas now we think of them as kind of crazy people. But you get a case like John Quincy Adams. It's funny for him to become, after his presidency, a leader of the Anti Masonic Party, accusing Masons of controlling the government against the will of the people, when in 1824 he becomes president, despite the fact that Andrew Jackson had the popular vote and the electoral college vote. People are very upset right now about the election, or they're very happy about the election. 4 years ago, mostly the same people were feeling the exact opposite, and a lot of that is hinging on popular slash electoral vote differences. Right, the last time you had one party win the popular vote, one party win the electoral college vote. So generally, half the population's angry and half the population's happy. Well, in 1824, it was way worse. I mean, just imagine if right now we were looking at a case where the popular vote went one way, the electoral college vote went the same way, and a different person ends up becoming president. It'd be mayhem. And that's exactly how John Quincy Adams beat Andrew Jackson in 1824. So uh, then he turns around 4, 5, 6 years later and is complaining that there's some kind of powerful group at the center of government controlling things regardless of how people vote, despite the fact that he had in a major way been a benefit had benefited from just that sort of group less than a decade before.
Yeah, man, it's crazy to look at, and they did fairly well, I guess, overall, as far as trying to get their name out there, right? Like they were able to get to a point where they were well known as the third party. I mean, like we said, they didn't have on an anti-Masonic party ticket a president put into place. They did have the governor of Vermont, but in the House of Representatives, I was kind of surprised. They had quite a few come up. We have, two listed from Massachusetts, 15 from New York, which is where they really kind of set up shop, right? One in Ohio, 17 in Pennsylvania, one in Rhode Island, four in Vermont. So they definitely had quite a few people on their tickets, enough to really get their name out there, to be able to become that known third party. And then died off in just over a decade, right? Like we see them in their first round, which was what, 1828 to I think 1840 is when they officially dissolved that. But then they're not done. We see at least someone under the same name. I don't know that it was any of the same people associated with that time, because we know the first round either went in to the big names, went into the Whig Party, and kind of the rest of the guys kind of devolved over to the Democrat side. But we do see it come back in 1872 under the name of an anti-Masonic party. And, they were around, they did a few things, didn't really hang on as much as I think they were hoping to, and fizzled out, dissolved officially the second time in 1888. My question is, do you think the anti-Masonic tendencies are going to take on that Masonic 3? Will we ever see an anti-Masonic party again?
Hmm. Uh, I hate to say it, but I think one of the reasons you were able to see the anti-Masonic Party once and twice was that Masonry was still that influential in society. All right, so
Yeah.
I'll say something that would probably be very unpopular with a lot of Masons today, and it's that uh, in some ways the anti-Masonic Party was not wrong. Uh, in my research, I've found that Andrew Jackson and other prominent Masons in the United States during his lifetime actually did utilize Freemasonry as a network to affect their political goals, and kind of play a giant chess match where Masonry was one of their primary vehicles for what they were wanting to do or get done, including It would probably be a topic for a whole different conversation or episode. The intentional uh, setup and failure of the Republic of Texas. Masonry was heavily used by Andrew Jackson and his peers. Um, you had uh, other than them in Europe, Freemasonry, Jacobinism, that whole element, monarchy versus democracy. These things had been really something that Freemasonry served as a way to uh, uh, wage those ideological wars going back into the 1700s. And so the anti-Masonic Party that we're talking about, and the big election being 1828 for that, round two of 24, really, I would argue had its infancy in Europe with the French Revolution, and people across Europe and then in the United States trying to make sense of why the French Revolution went the way it did. It became very, very brutal. Uh, and a lot of the blame was laid at the feet of French Freemasonry at that time, and the different royal factions that were utilizing Freemasonry for their motives. So I think the thing I would say the anti-Masonic Party and conspiracy theorists get right is that Freemasonry at times has been and can be used as a convenient tool for people with nefarious motives politically or what have you. But that's not what Freemasonry is, right?
Right.
I think all
Correct.
Freemasons would agree with that. That's the breaking point with anti-Masonic theories is they think that's inherently what Freemasonry is, and I would argue that it's just something that Freemasonry can, uh, because of its nature, be easily co-opted for. And the Anti-Masonic Party was not entirely wrong about some of its accusations. Another major factor that I think made the Anti-Masonic Party, uh, specifically the political party, uh, such a powerful thing uh, was the Erie Canal, right? The Erie Canal was finished and became such a major artery for American commerce at the same time that the Morgan Affair uh, came along, and so that put the nation's uh, focus on New York. And
Hmm.
when the Morgan controversy happened, uh, everyone was already looking at New York because of the Erie Canal. And so it wasn't like something happened up in this part of the country that nobody cares about. It was the capital of the religious movements that were happening. It was the capital of new commerce. Uh, Major politicians were coming out of New York. Of course, Joseph Smith and the LDS religion emerged from there and went westward. New York, the location was very important, and New York and Vermont were always the centers of the anti-Masonic Party during its 10-year or so uh, existence. Um, so yeah, there's those little factors that I think all of those things aligned. The Great Awakening, and could that happen today? Is your question? Uh, I gotta say it could. And I think right now, if you look around at Freemasonry today, the one reason I would say it couldn't is a sad reason, and that's that we're not actually as influential uh, or
Hmm.
as or as useful to influence as a vehicle, right? As we would have been at that time. Uh, so there's that reason to say that it couldn't happen. Uh, but who's to say that the pendulum doesn't swing and we don't grow again. I think anytime Freemasonry thrives, it is inevitable that anti-Masonic movements will also grow stronger. Uh, will an anti-Masonic party emerge for a third time? Probably just depends on how we handle our next boom.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to jump back for a second, mentioning where the anti-Masonic Party was, possibly not wrong in their thinking, it's very true, right? I mean, we see that back to the days of George Washington and all this. When you're in those positions, it's just kind of expected, or was expected. Like, if you're going to be somebody, well, you're going to be a Mason, and it just kind of is what it is. But we don't just see that in Masonry. And that's where we really get to the vital point that you brought up, that yes, it happens. Like that's a reality you can't avoid, but that's not what Masonry is. That is a natural tendency that happens, and it's not unique to Masonry, right? Like it's that bond that, correlates within Masonry, that builds that connection, that relation. And in other factors of life where you may experience that bond, be it maybe, you were in battle together, or you work together, you know each other from church, whatever, like those different bonds can create some of those same situations, but coming down to the factor being that bond, and not that is what Freemasonry is. So I think that is a important, connection to point out, or distinction to point out there. As for my thoughts on could it happen again, I like you just mentioned there, in today's day and age, I think the cabal rhetoric behind it all, the stuff we see online, is much bigger on that level than Freemasonry is, right? Like I don't think Freemasonry is at the point to have that impact that an actual party would come out. And yeah, I mean that sounds bad, but at the same time, where I could see it being used as a tactic, is if a politician came out on, I think, practically any level, and I don't see a politician coming out and like outright saying that they're a Freemason. I think that's just political suicide, in my opinion. But let's say somebody is on a presidential ballot, or any ballot for that matter, and it's just discovered that they're a Mason. With the shady tactics we see, and it's going to come up in Twitter feeds and whatnot, oh, he's a part of that. I could see the opposing party using that in an anti-Masonic party, rhetoric, so to speak, to turn that against them, to use that as a platform. So personally, I could definitely see something happening in that manner, but who knows? Time will tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been awesome, man. I think we had a pretty awesome conversation there. I know I enjoyed it. For all you guys out there, we appreciate you tuning in to Historical Light, and I'm going to send you guys over to our group as always. We can continue the conversation there. It's the Historical Light Masonic Research Group. If you're not a member, click join, get in on the awesome conversation, and we will see you there. Until next time, take care, everybody.